Hey, welcome to. I'm not actually a gas station attendant. It's been a while, but today we're no ball washing here. But truthfully, the gentleman we have on today, if it wasn't for him, Ian and myself and many of our friends wouldn't have experienced the things we experienced or had the lives that we're living to this day. So, welcome Joel Wick of Jihad and Makoto and multiple other ventures to the podcast.
Thanks. That's I mean, it's quite a nice intro. And just, I honestly super grateful when you guys reached out, because just to be able to connect with you two and be able to chat, but definitely humbled to be able to chat about these things that still to this day were important parts of my life and helped shape my philosophy. And so I mean, yeah, it's honestly when you reached out, I was like, man, I haven't talked to you or Ian in so long, and I was super stoked. And so yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully I don't ramble too much. I'll try to be
no, dude, we like rambling. Yeah. That's okay. That's our bread and butter.
Right on.
Yeah. I guess kind of speaking to that, at what point did you what's your first memory of finding something musically that you connected with?
Well, actually, my first memory is, I'll get to the punk rock and skateboarding, and that was pretty much the whole thing. But even before that, when I was a kid, I remember finding an Iron Maiden record on vinyl. And then the flip side of that, almost around the same time in the 80s, I don't want to date myself too much, but I found some really good breakdancing vinyl. And so I'm listening to Iron Maiden and breakdancing at the same time, in that same realm. And I just remember just being pumped and excited about music, right? So I was like, wow, and and then just what happened for me, my trajectory, just real quickly, is just I remember going to a mall one day, actually Crossroads Mall, and I had discovered skateboarding a few months before that. And I think, through that, it was I heard about this band called Black Flag, and I'm at the mall, and I'm in the record store, and everything went black, and I was like, what the hell is this? And so I bought it, and I still remember when I went home and put the needle on, and I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. And then literally it's just from there, it was I bought a Dead Kennedys record, and then I think Let Them Eat Jelly Beans, which is that classic compilation. And that just there it was. And then, and the other one was the Maximum Rock and Roll compilation. And it was just I discovered MRR right away, and it was all over. So.
With the Not So Quiet on the Western Front comp? Or?
Yeah. Yep. So, and then it just, from there, it was okay, a whole new world, man.
Well, and so, what was Kalamazoo? I assume you were living in Kalamazoo at this time.
Yeah. I had lived there. I was born and raised there. In fact, I was born and raised there, and I live in Portland now, but there's only two places I've ever lived, and I've been in Portland for about 10 years, but
yeah. What was the scene when you actually finally ventured into local bands? What was Violent Apathy still around, or?
I just missed them. Let's see. When I went to my first show, it would have been bands FAQ had just started. There was Man Alive, which was the folks in Black Spring. There was Memories of Tomorrow. There was a great band, a goth band called Murder of Crows that still to this day, I wish I could find some recorded stuff by them. And then, there were a few other bands, but I was just getting into it right. And then, for me, it was I think it was FAQ and Man Alive, and there were some other. There were folks, I just can't remember all their band names, but it was sort of end of Violent Apathy period, and all those Kalamazoo and Detroit folks were still doing some things.
Mm-hmm. What was the name of that band that the dude in Otsego who had that barn that we did some shows at?
Oh shit, Hammer 13.
Yes. Okay, that's. Was it and they were kind of if I remember right, I think Sean Barney told me they were kind of noise rocky. Yeah.
Those guys, Richard and Chris Remy, I think his name is, were definitely on the more noise, sort of like noise punk, whatever you want to call it back then. But I mean, at the time in Kalamazoo, one of the things that I missed by like, I think it was like a year and a half, was like there was a show in WME's campus, like East Hall Gym, and it was like Naked Ray Gun, Butthole Surfers, Negative Approach, you know what I mean? And it was like
Wow.
ton of different bands playing together. And it's just like, that still did happen back then. I think much more so, because there was that sort of like general overall, I don't want to say like newness to it, but more sort of like holistic, like, hey, let's have the Butthole Surfers play with Violent Apathy and, like whatever, right? Like, or, have like, here, the Meatmen are coming in to play with, Negative Approach and Naked Ray Gun, but then they're going to have like Sonic Youth happens to be touring and they're going to play with them too. So, there was that happening in Kalamazoo. Yeah. And I think Sean Barney is I think my earliest memory of like the people that I met around my age. And then, obviously started going to shows and just meeting people really.
Yeah.
Would you say that like when you started going as a younger person, like that there was kind of that hierarchy where there was like the slightly older kids who were like, they're a little grumpy towards you maybe? Or?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, to be fair, I was 15, 16. I was an idiot. And I'm like, one of the days I like went and got like a Misfits, Devil Lock haircut. Right. And I'm like, at the time I'm like, look, I was into Misfits, Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, all the stuff, 7 Seconds. Right. I mean, whatever. It's like a brand new thing, but yeah, I mean, you're young and energetic, so you go to the shows and like you want to just fucking do whatever. And there were a few folks, but I think there were other folks that, and I feel the same way today. It's like, well, I ain't gonna listen to Rancid because I think they're terrible. But you know what? if some 20-year-old like finds that and is inspired and then gets into other things, it's like you also want to be supportive of the creativity and like, I just. In my circle of friends, I'm sure with us, like we could be like sarcastic and kind of be old guy people, but I actually still believe in like, we got to find ways to create spaces for folks. And, and like even just the work I was doing with like Music Fest Northwest and like, Pickathon is like, these are, not venues, but just, events that, still providing like, especially Music Fest Northwest was crazy because for a few years it was like 13 venues around Portland and like it was awesome. I mean, you'd see everybody, bars, all ages, et cetera. And it's important to be able to have those outlets and those spaces. So, I mean, I got made fun of by Richard Bowser and a lot of folks, but whatever, man. Like, got to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird to think about that, like, because when we started going to shows, like especially in that sort of like DIY thing that was happening in Kalamazoo, like you and Derek and Sean were the oldest dudes, and you were like you were 5 years older than us.
I know.
Yeah.
And we were young. That's the thing is like Sean and Derek are like really the kind of like the two key elements, for myself of like, because Derek went to a different high school, Sean went to a different high school. So it was like, oh shit, I'm meeting different folks. And then like, Derek's from DC. So we immediately kind of bonded. And, I mean, I'd heard of the Discord scene and of course was listening to Minor Threat, but then, got the additional context from him and it was like, oh, I'm diving in. Right. And then, Sean was, I mean, honestly, Sean and Derek were super influential and just helpful. I mean, because we all used to just go skateboarding so much and like always be up on Western's campus, and that's how we found WIDR, right? So, again, I always come back to like punk rock and skateboarding, just like open the can of worms, and I'm still in it.
Yeah,
so here I am. So,
in Sean specifically, kind of, he had sort of a weird tie into first wave hardcore, as I recall. Wasn't his sister was married to?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Liz is, actually I forgot. Should give a. I mean, Derek and Sean were like my first friends, but then I met obviously Liz, and she started dating Richard Bowser, and then ended up marrying him. And Liz was just rad. I mean, she was doing shows at WIDR, the Monday night Club Soda shows, when I first met her. And then she and I and another kid wanted to put on shows. And like that's the first show I ever did was like Liz and I and this other kid named Dirk. And it was at the Whole Art Theater, which was in that fucking whistle stop, train stop building. So, yeah, Liz was super important, and very grateful to her that I think we sort of like, I mean, if I saw Liz today, like I'd be super happy to see her and like, we chat and whatever, but for a couple of years we were like, pretty good friends, right? Pretty close. And yeah, she was definitely a very helpful part of the scene back then.
And as I recall, I remember seeing some shows at Whole Arts, but it was on Kalamazoo.
I mean,
that was many years later, obviously.
Yep. Correct. It's kind of funny that the Whole Art show actually was like 89. And I was in a band with Sean called The Young and the Useless. Terrible name, but, and yeah, we put on a show with like us and Derek's band Progression and this band we were friends with from, the greatest city in Michigan, Jackson. But they were cool kids. So it was like cool. We were like, hey, let's do a show. So we did it at the Whole Art Theater. And, it's funny because at that time, again, that early wave of like Kalamazoo bands sort of had wound down, and like there were the Monday night Club Soda shows, but there really weren't any other shows happening except, I'm sure somebody was probably having a house show. So the show we put on was like a Saturday in March, and there hadn't been a show in a while because it was for all ages folks. And dude, the place just it just got packed. And, and then the Whole Art Theater folks were like, whoa, what the fuck, dude? We didn't think this was going to happen. And then I think we did another couple shows there, but then they were going to move. I mean, I didn't really know the folks that well, but, I'm thankful to them that they did provide us a space. I think later that summer I did a show with No Effects there, which is crazy because I'm like, God, I hate No Effects sucks now. But at the time, I was super into them, and that was the start, right? Because I was like, oh, this is fun doing shows with my friends' bands. And I'm like, hey, I want to see this band. And I'm like, well, how am I going to, I'm going to have to bring them here. Right. So, at that time it was like, hey, I'm going to write a letter and do a scene report in MRR, and I'm going to start calling around. And then it happened.
Wow.
So
I just want to say, I remember that Rich let me borrow, I think you let me borrow S&M Airlines. And I was like,
yeah, that was the one, dude.
Yeah. I was like,
it was Ribbed. It was actually Ribbed.
Was it Ribbed?
Was the one which is still a good record, honestly, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you think about it, like I think it was the S&M Airlines tour, right? And I was like, again, super young into skateboarding, so of course No Effects is going to be one of your favorite bands. And like the music is very punk rock, but I mean, you think about like a lot of their records, it's like, for me, I got out of them pretty quickly. So I was like,
yeah.
So, but yeah.
Well, and when Ian and I came in, we were it was kind of on the tail end of Kalamazoo in our estimation being a straight edge scene. At what point did that changing of the guard happen, where it was like all of a sudden it was a largely sort of like kids into Rev in 7 seconds?
I mean, I think I remember, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I think Derek and I discovering Rev, I mean, the first 7-inch, and then that New York hardcore record, the compilation. I mean, I mean, look, I think about it today and I'm like, all right, maybe a little embarrassed because Warzone were a bunch of dipshits, but, it's like, I mean, I dove head in. I was like, whoa, this is pretty fucking cool. And so Derek and I just dove in, and like, for me personally, like I was straight edge for a couple of years. And I mean, for those years, it was like, it made sense to me of, I just didn't want to drink and didn't want to go down the fucking rabbit hole of, I mean, a lot of drugs and shit, right? Like, I mean, it did happen, right? Like lots of folks, I mean, look at Larissa and other folks who've died. And I was just like, all right, straight edge is working for me. Obviously, you look back at it in hindsight, and I think the underlying, some of the morals and ideas, not too bad, but turned out to be a giant boys club. And at one point it was like, hey, wow, these are some of the jocks that used to beat me up in high school, so this isn't really working. But I think it was just that, and then Derek and I just really got into it, and we met some dude from Battle Creek, Marty Burgess, and
I was about to mention him being the biggest proponent of straight edge yet being the least
he absolutely was, and he had been to like to Detroit to see some shows of like 7 Seconds and like a couple of like Verbal Assault and like some other stuff. So it was like, oh, and he was definitely an inspiration to us. And so we would just hang out with him a lot. And then he had like some pen pals, at the time across the country, like trading tapes and stuff like that. And so we just got into it with him. And I mean, yeah, we went head first into it. So I remember like a year later, it's like I brought Verbal Assault to Club Soda, and then like, Unit Pride and Up Front. I did a show with them at Whole Art Theater. And I still remember to this day that band Unit Pride was like, hey, can we go to the mall to pick up chicks? And it was like, what? I mean, they were just rich boys from, they had to be from, California. And that was probably one of the first things that I was like, that's a letdown. But I was young, and it's like, I don't know, but I was definitely motivated, and I was like, cool, let's keep, I don't know, I just want to work, or like, I want to see bands, like, I want to meet people and be creative, and like, I obviously believe very deeply in like all ages shows, and that DIY spirit. So, it was a couple of years of that. And then I think it was just like, I still remember for me, literally like I turned 21 and probably a couple of months later, I was like, I guess I'm going to drink now. But I mean, I was still into a lot of like good hardcore bands, right? Like, even like still listening to Minor Threat and 7 Seconds and a lot of those bands. And, there was that really, really early, East Bay scene, which kind of led into eventually like, Kent McClard and, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really like, there was a couple years in Kalamazoo, Derek and I, especially into straight edge, Marty. And then I think also the other thing that made the change in the guard was like, I went out to the MRR house in like 89 or 90. I just, loved MRR, right? And I wanted to like stay there for a week and like talk to Tim Johann and Martin Sprouse and those folks. And I went out and I stayed at the MRR house, and like I slept in the basement every night by myself, surrounded by the greatest, like just Tim Johann had the record collection in the basement, but I mean, it was a finished basement. And he had this great house in San Francisco, and like I slept there every night surrounded by the greatest record collection, of all time. And he's like, yeah, you want to listen to these records, man, while you're down there, just sit and listen to them. I'm like, okay, so
wow.
And then I met Martin Sprouse from Pressure Drop Press, and that was and John Yates and I just such influential. I met I forget her name. Her name was Kim something, but she had done some columns for Kent McClard. And I met like and I forget her name, but it wasn't Sonia, but and then there was Kamala from Kamala and the Carnivores, but she was heavily involved in that scene out there. And I met all these folks in the same trip, and it was just like blew my mind, totally inspired, and came back home and was like, all right, how can I start a record store? How can I find a space for shows? Blah, 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 blah. And just kept trying to work on it.
Yeah.
That's so rad.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like props to the whole East Bay scene. 'Cause to me, it's like the East Bay scene and the Discord scene. And then of course, some of the Michigan scene, those are the ones for me early on.
Yeah.
Well, that's something Ian and I have talked about multiple times, is like, if we had grown up in a bigger city, like, and been attached to a bigger city scene, like, it would have been so much more codified. So like in Kalamazoo, people loved Lookout Records. They also loved Vermiform and Abolition, and some of them liked, the early Rev catalog or bands on, on New Age for that matter. And like, that wouldn't have happened. Like you wouldn't meet that many people whose two favorite bands were like Monsula and Judge.
No, totally. That's it. That's a great point. And I forgot to mention one thing about the early bands, Kalamazoo, the God Bullies. And, we would have, the God Bullies would play with FAQ and then some just like terrible hardcore band. And where everyone was all like fine. And like, obviously, God Bullies and their crowd are drinking heavily and doing other things. But, we're all at a house party hanging out. And like, I mean, honestly, that's how I learned about AMREP and like, some other like crazier, heavier noise stuff. And I was like, whoa, this shit's cool, So to your point of like, I would absolutely go from listening to Monsula to Judge to naked ray guns to, I saw the hyenas for the first time in like 86, and I was like, they came out of their van because it was the Barking Tuna Fest up on Western's campus, and it was just outside behind this building. And Sean Barney had said, "Dude, we got to see this band because Liz says that it's got the singer from Negative Approach," and we're like, "Fuck yeah!" And they rolled out of the van, which was like 20 feet from the stage, and like two of them still had blood dripping down their arm because they had just shot up. And I was like, what is this band? And then, it's the Hyenas in 86 or 87, whatever it was. And they were, even though it was outside, it's like we sat right up front and just fucking blew our mind. And, I think if it wasn't for, Larissa and John and like Liz getting Sean and I into it, I mean, the Hyenas were the other part of the trajectory for me. Was like, cool, it opened up a whole other world, and
I mean, that's how, like, we always talk about like whatever shows, just basement shows or something, but it's like, man, I saw Alice Donut at the venue you started, and I'm like, and everybody's like, who? And I'm like, that was my
that band was awesome.
Naked.
Yeah, I mean, and Alice Donut was just mind blowing, dude. Live, they were unreal, and that's not like to your point, Rich, about like if you grew up in a bigger city and things are codified. It's like that's why I'm ever always grateful that I did grow up in Kalamazoo. Is as frustrating as it was for all of us sometimes in some ways, but we did have, I felt like we were a little bit more open-minded than, some of the bigger scenes, right? It's like, fuck, Alice Donut's going to come in and blow our mind. And it's like, cool. Alice Donut's not like a hardcore band. They ain't straight edge.
No.
They're not like shoegaze college rock. They're fucking, they go under the, whatever you want to call it, punk rock. But punk rock for me was always a very, very large and diverse category.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So
and they were such, and most of their friends in Kalamazoo were definitely junkies,
Oh, for sure, yeah.
But they were such a fun band.
Oh, absolutely. And then that show, there was one of the biggest shows I ever did. Ian, I can't remember the show you're referencing. Was it the Alice Donut show at Club Soda?
No, he's thinking of the one at Dagobah Square.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, yeah. So I had done a show with probably a year before that, or maybe a year and a half before that. I'd start doing some of those Monday night shows, and one of the first ones I did was Alice Donut, the Digits, and Victims Family, and they were all on tour together, and it was fucking nuts. Like, it was a Monday night at Club Soda, and it sold out, and that was just like an eye-opener for me, because all three of those bands were incredible that night. And then there's just like everyone was there, right? I mean, that was, Club Soda's like 18 and over, so there was just so many obviously different types of folks, but it was like, holy shit, Kalamazoo's got this crazy good show happening. And so that was another way of like where people were connecting. I mean, I met a lot of people that night that I ended up knowing a lot better over the years, right? So
and they liked that show so much that they came back either later that year or a year later and played an all ages matinee at Club Soda.
Yep.
I forget who else played it. I remember the Deconstruction played it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And that was that's the other thing. The other person that I really I'm going to keep remembering stuff as we talk more, but also, Scott Town was super influential for us, and like getting to know him, and he was straight edge for a while with myself and Derek and Sean. So, there was that, but Scott Town had that additional insight because he was living in California for a while during the 80s, and then he moved back to Kalamazoo when he got married to his first wife. And so like I was living with him for a little while, and so he introduced me to even a lot more stuff. And then we went pretty heavy into that first initial round of like ebullition and vermiform and all that stuff. And I mean, I'm glad we did, because it was awesome. So Scott was also really always very supportive, and I mean, glad that guy came into my life. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but he was also one of the very influential figures.
Yeah, I keep kind of in touch with him on Facebook a little bit here and there, but Yeah, he seems to like he lives in Otsego now.
Yeah,
he has like
yeah.
2 kids. I think
Yep.
he's a rep for some snowboard company or
I
something.
think so. And like, I know he's like still riding his bike all the time, which is rad, you know. And
Yeah.
I mean, he's he's doing well from what I understand, and I'm happy for him. I mean, he's a quick story that I want to throw in that I think is relevant and just a fun anecdote with Scott. The 91, I think it was the first Lollapalooza, Rollins band was playing, and like somehow Scott and I was like doing, there was a zine I was doing, I can't remember which one it was, but I was like, oh, I want to interview Henry Rollins, and somehow I fucking like, it happened. Like his publicist was just like, oh yeah, okay, you and Scott, okay. Like, what? So there we are backstage at Lollapalooza, and we interview Rollins, and like, you know, I mean, immediately, like, you know, he sees me, I'm like this in my teens kid, super skinny, whatever. I look probably like an idiot. And so I'm sure he probably was like, oh, I gotta do this interview. And Scott was just gonna take photos because he's so good at taking photos. But I was like, Scott, like, you know your shit, like, feel free to throw in a question. But, you know, he took a ton of photos. And anyways, but, you know, Fugazi had recently, I'd done the first Fugazi show at Club Soda, and, you know, Fugazi had records out. I was actually heavy influenced by them. And I just remember at various points in the interview, like, Henry was like, you know, he wasn't the best of the time to interview. But anyways, I was a little bit pushy, and I started calling him out. I'm like, well, your new album, you didn't even put it on a vinyl. What's up with that? And then I started, it sort of like snowballed from there. We got to a point where I said something about Fugazi, and he was like, well, you couldn't get me to play the shitholes that Fugazi plays. And I was like, well, what's funny, Henry, is that I'm doing a show with them in a couple months at State Theater Kalamazoo, and like, you couldn't even fill that. So I guess, you know, and he got super pissed. And then like, there was at some point, something about the vinyl of his new record, and he said, yeah, I don't blah blah vinyl, CD is the way, you know, the future, whatever. And then he said, and I know that just pisses off you know, 18-year-old or 16-year-old punk rock skateboarders like you, so haha, you know. And it was just like, okay. And
Wow.
you know, it just I definitely was like, that was one of those times where like, be careful what you wish for when you meet your heroes, right? And I was like, wow, Henry Rollins is basically a sexist macho asshole. And I was like, cool. Anyways, but yeah, Scott was like taking photos the whole time, and he sort of like jumped in a little bit to save me, because I'm sure Henry was going to kill me. At least Scott said, he's like, dude, that look in his face was, I think he was going to punch you. And so Scott sort of like, you know, just, Scott was great, man. He like took it, and he like sort of asked another question that would sort of like get us back on a tangent of something. And, you know, we finished the interview. So, I mean, I will say this, I would like to, you know, just give credit to Scott Town, because I could have had my ass kicked by Henry Rollins, but I didn't. And Scott Town saved me. So thank you.
Damn.
Yeah.
Good story.
Yeah, Scott was great. Always very nice and welcoming.
So yeah, and the guy's so creative. Oh, sorry, Ian, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, as far as booking shows, like, I always read about like venues being like, oh, geez, I don't know about, you know, like this punk stuff or any hardcore bands or anything.
Yeah.
Did you get any pushback from any venues about?
Oh yeah. I mean, all the time, and like especially if I was trying to like find a space to do shows, you know, I mean. Yeah, I got pushed, you know, even like Club Soda, when I started doing, the thing about it was like, there were some Mondays, they've been doing Mondays for a while, so, but they had bands like, even before my time, you know, it's like, they'd had like, you know, the Smashing Pumpkins and Soundgarden and like, you know, whatever, right? But then it was like, all right, I'm going to go into the even weirder zone. And so there were some times where I got some pushback, and then I was doing those all ages shows at Club Soda, and I got pushback on that. But the thing is, I was like, well, y'all ain't doing anything on a Sunday afternoon, and I'll pay you this much rent. Give me 2 or 3 hours. And so they were like, okay, you know, and they always gave me kind of shit, because they're like, wow, this shit's terrible, and like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, whatever, fuck off. Like, there's so much more, you know. But, I mean, you know, like Dagobah Square, I mean, eventually, like, we got shut down by the city because the neighbors fucking complained, and the cops didn't like us. And, yeah, and I mean, some of the other places, like, you know, cops would show up, and they would. I mean, they would harass us, you know. I mean, I tried to play along at some of those places to just like, all right, cool, what do I got to do with the city to, like, you know, the codes and all that stuff. And we tried. And in some places, like 31G, it worked for a while. But you know, you got to have money to keep things up to code. And like, I was a staunch believer in $5 shows and just, you know, I don't want to say like not making money ever off things, but you know, it needs to be reasonable, affordable, and like there's a purpose here. And so, I mean, you know, you're never going to be able to like really honestly do an all ages place in smaller cities where you can keep it up to code and do all the things and survive. You know, I lost so much money, but I mean, whatever. So yeah, anyways, to answer your question, Ian, there's definitely like pushback all the time. And then like, you know, people from the community sometimes would be like, what the fuck's going on down there at 31G or Dagobah Square? And, you know, whatever.
Because I remember, I'm assuming you booked that show. There was it was Mule at Club Soda.
Oh yeah.
It was just fucking like, it was like a Dukes of Hazzard episode. Like people were just
I mean, Mule was, they were a band. I'm just going to say that. I liked them at the time, and I was like, it's just like, wow, just rock, like whatever. Yeah. But I mean, let's be honest, at the time in those guys in Mule, and I mean, I have no idea where they are now, so they could be fine, but they were assholes. They were pompous and arrogant and just had, you know, shitty people. And then like you said, yeah, like a Dukes of Hazzard episode, it was just like, yeah, I mean, the first time, was either second time I booked them, they literally called me like 3 days before, and they're like, hey, we're not gonna be able to make it because Preston's in jail in Louisiana. And I'm like, cool, sounds good. But then, you know, I did them some other times, and like there was a show I did, was it at the Warehouse, or maybe it was a Club Soda show, and like there's like 300 people that showed up, so it was right in that prime of like when they were on Quarter Stick and, you know, the Hyenas and all that stuff. And
I remember one at Club Soda that was, it might have been a weekend night even. I don't remember, but it was definitely like pretty packed. I feel like maybe the Hyenas played it as well, maybe, but
I think there was a show I did with Tar that was like one of the first Saturdays Club Soda ever let me book, and it was like Tar, Mule, and someone else, and it fucking, you know, we had like 300 people, you know, and then so like the Club Soda owners at the time were like, maybe we should do some of these sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, you should. So, but yeah, like that touch and go tangent thing. Like, I mean, I still say, you know, touch and go, super influential to me. Granted, some of the folks not the best to work with. I mean, like the Digits, one of the best punk rock bands of all time. But the second time I did a show with them, they showed up, and the Club Soda didn't have a J that day for the marquee, so it just sorry. Club Soda ran out of D's, so it was like DIJITS, and like Rick Sims got so pissed, and he would not play her sound check until they fixed it. And I was like,
Jesus,
okay.
Jesus, so just be stoked your name's on a fucking marquee. Jesus.
You know, and it's just kind of like, I mean, the Digits were a great band, super good live, but Rich Sims was unfortunately a bit of a prima donna and maybe not the nicest person. And like, man, there were a ton of folks like that, you know, throughout the underground, and it was just like, yeah, I mean, there's so many stories, but anyways, it was like, that's something that happened.
Well, let's talk about your bands. As you had said, you were in Young and the Useless. No, me and Sean Barney were in that band. Fortunately for everyone's ears, it was short lived, but maybe, you know, 9 months or a year, I think is how long they were around. Did you guys ever record?
No.
Okay.
We were just like, we were so new at this stuff.
About it.
Yeah. I mean, we played a lot of shows, and it was like super fun, but and then I think the reason we broke up because either our guitarist or our drummer was moving, and we were just all like, all right, let's do some other stuff, you know? Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I think Mike Howard at one point told me the guitarist was kind of like a crossover dude from like Delton or somewhere like that.
Not Delton, Hastings, even better. Well, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Delton was fucking awful. Jesus. That's exactly it. So, you know, just at the time, yeah, I mean, we were young, right? So it was like, cool, let's do something else, you know?
Was Firesale the next thing you did, or? Yeah,
that was, and that was good times. I, you know, enjoyed that quite a bit. And, that was another thing that, I mean, it's a perfect segue into like the important folks that sort of like set the path for you and inspire you. And like, I remember, Firesale, like we wanted to like do an actual tour, and so I just sort of like figured out at the time I had a few connections, and then Jenny Toomey and Kristen Thompson ran a label called Simple Machines, and they put out this amazing booklet, like how to put out a record, right? And it was like super helpful. And I'd written to them, and I was like, hey, so my band wants to come and play like DC and just kind of like tour East Coast or something. I'm like, do you have any, anyways, long story short, they helped us out with connections, and then they also booked a show in DC with Firesale, their band Tsunami, and then Admiral, and it was on like a Wednesday night at some restaurant. And so Firesale, just went on tour, and like we played some shows with Admiral, and became friends with him. And then I still think about that. I think about like we played a show with Tsunami and Admiral on like a Wednesday night in DC, and I still remember like, oh, there's Alec Mackay, there's Amanda Mackay, there's this person from Scream and whatever, and it was like, oh shit. And you're meeting some really, really great folks, and like Kristen and Jenny were just, they were tremendous individuals. Like their whole label was like super inspiring, and man, being able to make those connections on that tour was super helpful and like monumental for myself especially. And so
I was just gonna say, we actually have some video footage of Firesale playing that we got.
What?
Billy Sprague sent me a large care pack. Did I send that one to you already, Ian, to digitize?
I got it digitized.
Wow. Yeah, I got to see that, man. When you guys get that digitized, that would be, wow. Where's it from?
I think it was in Tacoma Park, or it may have been DC, which,
Holy shit.
same area, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely want to see that. Wow. Because, I'm sure I look terrible, but yeah, Firestone was great. And then the thing is like, we were like, another person that I had become friends with through skateboarding and straight edge was Ryan Gage, and then we wanted him to be our roadie on the Firesale tour, and obviously like he hit it off with all of them, and then I had I don't remember exactly how this happened, but I wanted to like also start another band that was just fucking more punk rock and louder and whatever, and a little bit more like lyrically direct. And I know like the guys in Firesale, all great musicians, and like they wanted to do their thing. And so I think that's when Derek and I started Jihad. But then
no, it would have been Spork.
Oh yeah, sorry, Spork.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's where it was. It was like I was going to try and do Firesale and Spork at the same time, and then it was like the guys in Firesale really just wanted to like they wanted to do something even more different, right? And just like, and then Ryan wanted to sing, and so it was like, I don't remember exactly how it all went down, but it was like, all right, cool. So then, Spork. And then, I'd met Eric Lacombe earlier that year or something, and we just totally hit it off. And, and then came Spork.
Wasn't Steve Kenny in the original version of that as well, or?
Yes. I'm trying to remember, because we did jam with him a couple times, and
then he decided to take a nap instead.
That's a good way to put it. And then because we had Steve Versailles, and then the three of us were just like, fucking, let's go, let's do this. Mm-hmm. And man, that was great fun. Eric is super creative and was a joy to be around. And so it's
hilarious.
Like, yeah, Spork was great. We had such a great time. We obviously, figured out ways to play shows, and we made more connections, right? That's when I first met Charles from Grin Blanston, who was like probably the other main key person in my life that, like, if I wouldn't have met him, I wouldn't have met Ted Leo, and then I wouldn't have just like met so many other contacts that like really fueled the 90s for me. And pretty much between Simple Machines and Charles, that was how I learned to like, okay, here's how I'm going to put out a record, and here's what I'm going to do, and all that stuff. So
yeah. I'd actually wondered how you'd met Charles Maggio, like, or if it was like
I just wrote him.
Yeah, it felt like there was definitely, obviously there was a kinship between sort of the ABC No Rio scene, yep, and what Kalamazoo was doing. Like,
I just wrote him. I wrote him and Sam letters because I was going to try at Dagobah Square or sorry, this is pre-Dagobah Square. There was the Hole in the Wall Records,
Hole in the Wall,
first record shop, right? Still at the Spork, and I was just like, hey, I'm opening this record store, and I really want to carry your stuff. And like they wrote back, and we worked it out. And then I think Charles was between the two, the first person I talked to on the phone actually, and we just hit it off. And it was like, yeah, I mean, it was almost like a long lost brother, right? And that's how it happened. And then I think within a year, I like went out to visit him just to go out to the East Coast and like, see some shows. And like, he lived with his parents and he had this whole basement and his whole collection. He ran his label from there. It was like insane. And his parents were awesome. And so like they would let bands stay there all the time. And so it's like Charles's house was like just a hotel for like every band that the three of us, listened to at some point in the 90s. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about Charles, one of the best humans I've ever met, and I absolutely wouldn't be, the person I am today without meeting him. So,
oh yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, it sounds like they had a high-end flop, crash pad happening in Paramus.
Exactly. Except it was a really nice house with parents, and like you'd get up sometimes, and I'd go upstairs to like I don't know, use the other bathroom or like whatever, and like his mom would just be like, "Hey, how's it going?" And like his sister would be there, and it was just like awesome. I mean, so awesome. That family was, oh my god, so cool, so supportive.
So you mentioned it, but like Joel ran a small record store called Hole in the Wall, and that was the place that we went to. We were like that was like the first.
That was the one. There it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was truly very, very, very small, but it was.
Oh my god, it was so small. I still think about that.
Oh, a costume store.
Yeah. Oh man, that dude! Don't get me started. The timid rabbit, and that guy is psycho, and and he's a shitty landlord. I'm sure he's probably fine today and a good person, but man, it was weird dealing with him. But he was also, I think, weird enough that he was like willing to give us a chance. Because that room that we rented out, it was a store. It was like you wouldn't do anything with it. So he's like, well, might as well. And it gave us that opportunity, to do that. And then that house that he had that was on the property, it was like basically kind of an abandoned house. And then at one point I was like, I need a place to live. And like he said something to me. He's like, well, you could rent out that house. And then it was like me and Jake Wilson and Scott Town and someone else. And so we moved the store in there. And we're living in there, but like we didn't have a kitchen sink for a while. We had to oh my god, it's such a nightmare. And then we started doing the shows, and I remember at one point Scott and I were both living in the basement, and there was a room in the basement that was like whatever at the end of the basement room, and I just had a live wire hanging out from the ceiling that was like right. And then the big show we did there at that house was Born Against Rorschach and Downcast, and like at some point in that show, there was the bands would play basically in a part of the basement that normally during the week was the bedroom for Scott and I, right? We just slept on the floor. And so the bands are playing, and at one point there was like some pipe like burst or something, and it was like, holy fuck, dude. It was just so, I don't know. But that show was tremendous, and of course that was very helpful, and like, there were like Downcast was there and like Born Against and Rorschach, and then everyone from all over Michigan who was into that. It was like, yeah, totally made further connections at that show.
Well, and Andy Cornell actually has a funny story about that show. Apparently he had, from Portage, had taken a bus, like as he would often do downtown to go skating. Yeah. And then he took the bus up West Main and got off and went to the show, and his parents showed up at the show, and like, yeah, in the middle of like Downcast or something, was like, is there some kid named Andy down there?
What? I don't remember that. Oh my god. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, Andy, I love Andy, and like I remember Andy, he was like, do I want to say when you have a place of like, here's our best customer, but like Andy would always come probably once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks, right? And he was like so awesome to, just interact with. And like when he was like super young and just like into punk rock and skateboarding, and like he would ask questions, and he'd be like, about like certain records or whatever. And so, I mean, obviously, and then I'm like, well, I have ones that I think are really good, right? Or bands I love. So I was like, hey, check this out, and it's really great to interact with him. And then, yeah, he was absolutely like one of our biggest, like, sort of advocates and just like supporter, and like obviously brought other folks into the whole thing for us, which was great. So when did you guys first go to Hole in the Wall? Like, do you remember?
Fall of 91. Fall of 91. Yeah, like I'm Dietrich and Joe and I all got
Dietrich. Oh man, straight edge. Wow.
Oh, he's still straight edge. I mean, I am too, but like, yeah.
Oh man, and then Mike Howard. Is Mike Howard still around? Like, what's he like? Have you ever talked to? Have you two?
Yeah,
talked to him, or?
yeah. I stay in touch with him. He actually, for the past, I would say, decade or more, he's lived in Brooklyn. He's a photographer.
Nice, dude.
Yeah,
okay.
I went to New York City for vacation. Pre-pandemic, so I think it was like 2019, the end of 2019, and hung out with him quite a bit.
Oh, rad, man. I'm stoked. I am glad to hear he's a photographer. That's rad. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, it's crazy where people end up.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
What? I was just going to ask, like, when did you start Jihad?
That was... Spork actually broke up. Like, it wasn't like with like, because like Jihad and Quixote, like I started Quixote when I was in Jihad, but like Spork had actually broken up because I think it was either Eric or Steve didn't want to do it anymore, and it was like, I mean, whatever, it was like fine, and then I wasn't in a band for a while, and then I think Derek and I obviously were best friends for the longest time, and like throughout that whole time, like Derek's in a band, I'm in a band, and then we're like, we had met Craig Lacombe through Eric Lacombe. Craig was the younger brother of Eric, and we just had been wanting to do a band, and that's literally just there it was, right? So it would have been sorry, I don't know the dates perfectly, but I know we definitely like started in like 93 or 94, right? Maybe late 92, but probably 93. And our original drummer was like, man, so weird, he's 50 at the time. Yeah, and like we would practice in his parents' basement, and they were like super rich and lived at that house at the top of the fucking Westwich Hill, and it was crazy. And like his mom was super cool, and it was like whatever. But then, we start wanting to play some shows, and I mean, got a little tricky trying to take a 15 and 16-year-old like down to Indianapolis for a show, or like there were a couple times where we had to sneak him out, and he had to lie to his parents that he was just going to his friends for the week. I mean, it's just total like just exactly what you'd expect of like shenanigans, right? And and eventually though he just actually was kind of like, I don't actually really want to do this, whatever. And that we had met Matt Gorton, because I had met Dave Gorton, Matt's older brother, Dave and Randy O, and a lot of the folks from the Ypsilanti and like Ann Arbor and Detroit scene before I met like Matt Weeks and Current, but like I mean we just gelled with Matt G, and he was coming up to Western to go to school anyway, so he's absolutely great drummer, and like we just brought him in, and then we went from there, as you all know.
Well, and I remember being at the first Jihad show. You were singing. I don't know if Craig was even.
Oh yeah, that's right. Wow.
But like it was a historic show because it was the first Jihad, first Ordination of Aaron show, and it was the first appearance of Ottawa.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, there's videotape footage of that. I think Paul Bear has it, and he just hasn't gotten around to digitizing it, I guess.
I love Paul.
Yeah,
I found out recently. I didn't know this. Like, Kurt McConaughey. Hope I pronounced his name right, but Kurt and Paul, are in that band, and like I didn't exactly know where Paul. Paul, I guess, lives in Grand Rapids, and like he's got a kid and like doing really well, and like so Paul and Kurt are obviously close, and so I got to get back to Michigan at some point in the next year and see those guys because I miss them.
Yeah, Paul recently moved back up to Petoskey. He doesn't seem stoked on being there, but as far as I know, him and Kurt are still doing that band. And
I know like Paul married Trish, and like they have a kid, and I didn't know they moved to Petoskey. Okay,
but
cool.
I mean, I think he's still. I know like him and it was him and Kurt and Derek and I don't know like how well they're going to be able to keep going, but as far as I know, there's still a thing. So
cool. That's awesome. Yeah, that show, man. You're right, because it was like Current and Jihad, or Nation of Aaron, and Ottawa. Like, I mean, it was phenomenal. And that was one of the times where like we obviously hit it off with like Justin LeBeau and Weeks and Broche and there were several Detroit folks that had come up. And man, yeah, what a great connection. And that pretty much that show propelled all the connections and all the things moving forward after that. So.
What would you say was your favorite venue in Kalamazoo? Whether you played it or booked it?
Yeah. I mean, man, it's kind of hard to say because I really enjoyed 31G when we had it going right and it was working really well. But, I mean, I always did love playing Club Soda because if you had the right sound person, it sounded great. And the stage wasn't too high, but it was like... I mean, I still remember, like, I'm an idiot sometimes, but I'm glad I did it because it gives me the memories. I was like, hey, I'm going to book the Jesus Lizard, but guess what? I'm going to book Jihad on that show. And, we played with the Jesus Lizard, and it was like, obviously, like, Club Soda sold out. And I had the audacity. I did this on purpose to be sarcastic, but that was the first Jihad 7-inch. Like, we'd put it out that week, and I was like, we opened the show, and then In Ourselves played, and then Jesus Lizard. And we obviously did not deserve to play that show, but I stood up there and was like, hey, I just want to thank the Jesus Lizard for coming to play our 7-inch release show. And, I think it went over okay with him because, David Yao is a sarcastic, dude as well. But that was a pretty crazy show.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Pretty nuts.
Well, like, because for me, I mean, obviously I have a lot of nostalgia with the Club Soda matinees. There weren't a ton of them, but when they happened, they were always great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But also, like, strangely, the place I have the most memories, obviously because you did a ton of shows there, was McCourty Street.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, that was John Clark's house. Totally.
Yep.
John Clark was also very influential and helpful in those days. Was definitely like very much a force for like not only like him and Brian Jackson had that house and they let us do shows, but John was just philosophically almost like not super anarchist, but just really smart and like came from that realm. And he was someone that was like deeply influential to me at that time. And like we literally just have nights of like long discussions, and things like that. And that house was, that's where, what we did. John Henry West is one of my favorite shows that we ever did there. Yeah,
that was a great show. It was them and Dammit Hall and Engage, I think. Yeah, it was Engage.
Yep. Yep.
I just remember Corey, the singer of John Henry West, was fucking crazy. And I think like I remember getting my feet stomped on multiple times. Like,
oh, for sure, dude. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the best shows I ever did, period. They were, and of course, it's like I had a backstory to that. I had done a show with Fuel and Sarah Kirsch back in, I want to say 90. I did this show at Club Soda, and Fuel, because I'd gone out to MRR and met all those folks. John Yates had started that label. I forget what it was called, but
Allied.
He put out that Allied. Yeah, he put out that Fuel Flight Cam 7-inch, and then I had seen Fuel at Gilman Street when I went out there, and I was a huge fan, and so I like immediately, tried to connect with Sarah and like Fuel, kept in touch with them. Did a show with Fuel in the flight camp. A Sunday
Admiral
matinee was like
too, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like Admiral, Fuel, Flight Camp, the Laughing Hyenas, and someone else. And like, I have the flyer somewhere.
I have the flyer.
Yeah, it's fucking unreal that show even happened because it's like all those great bands. And then and that's Sarah and I had always kept in touch, and just kind of like went from there, right? And then obviously I had written to Kent McClard when he was doing No Answer, so I also had made connections with him. So it was like at that point, pretty much any Ebullition band or bands from out there, if like if they were coming through Michigan, it was like that we were going to try and find a way to obviously do a show with them. So.
Yeah, well, to the degree that Scott from Sinker and Amber Inn, not that long ago, several years ago, I mean, it feels like yesterday, but it was probably about 5 years ago, he had mentioned that Kalamazoo on the Sinker tour was one of the best shows they played that whole tour.
Yeah, I love Scott, and like they just Sinker was. I mean, yeah, I think about all that stuff now, and I'm like, it's crazy if I think about the connections that I made. Just speaking to like me personally, because I know you all did too, but like just. I'm so like grateful and thankful, and like that's one of the reasons where it's like, as you all get older and things get in the way, like I got to work a job, I got to pay the bills now, which sucks, right? I'm super thankful that I did those things and like did push myself to just do all that stuff, and like sure, I did lots of stupid things and made mistakes doing shows and played in shitty bands, but man, I'm so like happy and grateful and thankful. And I mean, obviously, like wouldn't have met you guys and like wouldn't be talking to you today, right? So, yeah, I mean, Scott's got a point where it's like we were all trying to connect. And I think one of the things for me that I've always thought about is that, I mean, look, I took crap from everybody in Kalamazoo because, the Noise Rockers gave me crap about the Ebullition bands, and you guys gave me crap about, doing, some of the pretty shady noise rock band, weird bands, like whatever. But I like a lot of it, and the underlying theme for me is like, look, I'm not normal, so I need to try and create a space for myself, and I really want to, I mean, I have energy, so I want to put effort into creating a space for other folks so they can connect, and just like, I suck at it as being a musician, but apparently, I have a good talent of like being able to coordinate. Like I always have had that. And so it was like going to try and figure out a way and like, let's try and connect people and build a space and yeah, just, kind of go from there. Right.
Well, and just about, real quick, to be fair, I don't think Ian and we were too young to have any criticisms of like, to us, it was all punk. So we didn't.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I didn't mean it like. Sorry, I absolutely not. You, but there were definitely folks in the straight edge scene that would be like, why are you doing a show with Hammerhead or why are you doing a show with the Digits? And it's like, well, because I am. And I mean, to be fair, I took way more heat from the folks of like Twitch and like Thought Industry and like. Not necessarily the dudes in the bands, because the Oberlins and like Dustin were very supportive, but the crowd, their scene was certainly, they all looked down on us, right? Like I'm looking at a flyer right now for, I don't know if you remember this show at 31G. It was Shotmaker, some band called Constantine Sincati, Young Pioneers, Transmagnetti, right? And, one of the greatest shows of all time. And, the other crowds of Kalamazoo, obviously gave me shit for it and, looked down on all of us. And it was like, fuck you. What, I don't have time for that. So,
well, and something Andy and I have talked about several times, and Ian and I have too, like what you did actually kept us from just being some fucking like college town with a college scene.
Oh, I know.
We were a national and even to an extent international because of what we were doing in basements. To anywhere between 20 and 100 people,
Yeah, I mean, we just, the one thing about our scene is that, it was small, but we had, I mean, and you two included, and like Andy and his sister and like Liz Barney, and I mean, I go on and on, right? We had great fucking humans, and folks that were creative and like had a desire, and that made a huge difference. And as folks connected to, the shows themselves were like the starting point for the connections, but then it just went from there, and it was like fucking great. Like, it was always like super cool to hear about like you guys would be like, hey, we're going on tour and do this thing, and I was just always super excited to hear about like how it went or what you were doing, or like same thing with like the God Bullies, like they're doing stuff and putting records out, and they're like, I'm just trying to like take information in and learn from everyone, right? But also be happy of for folks that are getting out there and like, whether it's trying to put out their own records or going on more tours, it was always inspiring. I was always excited.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I mean, that's the thing that Ian and I keep coming back to, is just how like there, if we had grown up like closer to Detroit and were going to shows in Detroit, I don't know if I would have either I would have become like some like person who I would fucking hate, or I would have ended up, because there was such a white power presence in Detroit.
Oh my God, man.
I would have just stopped going point blank. I don't know how, like, I've talked to Matt Weeks about this recently, but it's like, man, like we'd show up to shows and like it was scary. Like it
was. I mean, I remember fighting. Yeah, I remember fighting skinheads in the pit in like '88 or '89 at St. Andrews at a Forced Anger show. Forced Anger were like the one band that at the time was standing up to those people in Detroit. Really good hardcore bands, super socialist. And I mean, man, I was scared, and I was like, wow, I totally agree with you, dude. And I don't know how Weeks made it, and I'm so glad that he and Broche and LeBeau and those guys didn't succumb to that. We didn't, and it's good. And I think because we all just found each other pretty quickly, and then we just supported each other.
Yeah, and I think that Matt, like specifically, like, well, a lot of those people I know from then, like, they kind of paled around with the Pitbull dudes.
Yeah,
dudes
for sure.
were like, weren't going to take any shit either.
No, not at all. And that's Otto Budge, who did, I forget the name of the zine he did, Sold Out.
Yeah.
And, I think that Otto was that bridge from the end of the Detroit hardcore into like, obviously like, straight edge hardcore, but also a little bit of a savior for Weeks and the folks, and me too, of like, oh, okay, Detroit's not just a complete violent shithole, the scene wise, which it was for a while. And then super slowly, the remnants the precursors to Current and some of those other bands, started forming. And, I mean, Otto was huge, in helping out and the Pitbull folks. It was like, for me and Derek, we were like, hey, cool, there's a band in Detroit that's not a bunch of racist skinheads or super crazy drug addicts, that was helpful, definitely.
and that's
have you saw his sorry, go ahead, Ian. No, you go ahead.
That's the thing, like, I just got done reading Disco's Out, Murders In, which, Rich, I think that's your book, and I gotta give it back to you for the second time. But like, that was fucking scary in California, around here. Like, at shows in the 80s, like, people were getting literally killed and beat to death.
Yep.
And it's like, there was always this stigma about Kalamazoo being like, oh, they're so sensitive.
Bunch of emo pussies.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
But it's like, shit happened in our state too. Like, there was like you're saying, there's like crazy shit, and that's fucking why people didn't want it to get out of hand, because it could
exactly. Hey, so that book you mentioned, I think I'd heard the name, but like, I should probably read that, shouldn't I?
Yes, you should.
It's good. It's really good.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to order it today. That's right. No, thanks for bringing that up, because I forgot. I remember hearing about that book, and then, cool. Look, to your point, I mean, it was bad in Detroit. And then the other thing that I want to throw in, that I think this was just a teeny bit before your time, this probably would have been like 89 or 90, but, the Northern Hammer Skins tried to come into Kalamazoo and take it over, and like, we got in a literal fist fight in Bronson Park with them. We were beating them with skateboards and like all this shit.
Oh wow!
And we won, and they didn't really quite come to town and like take over. But then this dude Shane Plowman, who was a punk rocker in town, he moved to Muskegon and got involved with like some racist skinhead gang, and like they came to shows sometimes and tried to like start shit. And like, man, I remember being at the Ice Pick in Muskegon at a DOA show, and the Nazi skinheads showed up, and they were Sieg Heil, and like, dude, it was just fights, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And so I mean, like, the Ebullition stuff and the East Bay stuff, MRR, other stuff was like the safe spaces in a sense. And I was like, okay, this is the route we need to go, right? Like, let's, I mean, I'm not perfect, but like, I don't have a bunch of fucking violence, and like, I got no room for any of the isms, because they're, just be a good human. And I'm glad that all of us on this podcast and many other folks that, would be listening, I mean, we just went a different route, and, we had lots of late night conversations, right? We all did. And it was really cool. Some of the basement shows were like, 20 people would show up, and we'd all just hang out.
I remember like the scariest shows like we ever went to when we were kids were like Grand Rapids, and it was just
Oh my God, fuck that town, Jesus Christ.
yeah, it's not as fighting skinheads in the park with skateboards. That's insane. Like that's
it just, I mean, yeah, and I mean, look, I met some super cool people from Grand Rapids and like other towns in Michigan, but for a while, the Grand Rapids scene absolutely like violent and just not good people. And Muskegon for the longest time, man, that county itself is just historically like super racist, unfortunately, violent. And you know, the ice pick was, I mean, I saw Gigi Allen there, and it was just like a fucking nightmare.
What was that?
88,
wow.
I think.
So he still had hair.
Yeah. Hey, just so you know, I know we're just in the podcast, but I'm sorry that if either of you don't have hair, but dude, my hair is the longest it's been in my life. I haven't had it cut in 2 years because of the fucking pandemic, and I work from home. And I was like, fuck it, I just keep it growing. And like, dude, I look like Jesus Christ, you know, in the sense of like, unfortunately though, let's not get into religion, but like, you know, what mainstream America thinks Jesus Christ would have looked like, even though it's totally wrong, right? But anyways, it's just like, I got a lot of long hair. I'm like, I don't know, the pandemic's been weird, man. I'm glad that the three of us are talking and made it through that. So I'll leave it at that.
Right on.
Yeah. It's I mean, Ian, I think, is last I knew, still has a full head of hair. I certainly do not. But what would you say was to you? I mean, obviously, it's very subjective, but like, what was the point where you felt like Kalamazoo was kind of done? Like, is this as a DIY music scene?
I don't know. I mean, look, I moved out to Portland 10 years ago, and then before that, you know, my last band I played in was Mesa, and like we played, you know, right up until I moved. I mean, I guess it would have been, okay, so we had, you know, Michigan Fest 2002, which is rad, and then, you know, a year later, like, I mean, Makoto had to fucking stop doing stuff because, like, I just got, honestly, like, really screwed by a couple distributors, and, like, you know, there was just some other factors that went into it, and it was like, wow, this is just not gonna happen, right? I think, you know, there were absolutely, you know, like Matt Dorban and like some other folks were doing shows, but you know, a lot of folks have started to move away and whatever. So, you know, probably in the, you know, the 2004, 2005, it was like, you know, but there was still, I mean, gosh, I'm trying to remember, Craft Brow, right? And I forget her name. I think it was Liz, not Liz. And I can't remember, but she ended up moving out and like, I think still works for Saddle Creek Records and some stuff. But, you know, there were folks doing some shows at Craft Brow, and Matt Dorban was still doing some shows. So I felt like they were still trying to like keep that DIY ethos alive. It just, from more of the, maybe you want to call it like the ebullition and Lookout and like whatever standpoint, yeah, that probably like, you know, I was still there, but a lot of you all and the folks we knew had like moved to Chicago or, you know, wherever. And so I think it was probably, 2003, 2005, where it sort of dwindled out.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's strange to think about, but like, there's so very few of us like, who stayed in Kalamazoo. Like Sean's never left. Scott, I think he's been a few places, but like, he's pretty much stayed in southwestern Michigan.
Totally.
Like, Alan lives in Utah. Rob Hicks actually moved back recently, but the brothers live. Yeah. And so did Andy Cornell. He moved back to Kalamazoo.
Wait, Andy moved back? Why did he move back?
Yeah. His parents are getting older, and
I understand that totally.
And it's also one of those things where I don't think he's really ever been able to really make a solid go of things anywhere else he's lived. So he's sort of like, well, I have a solid support system there. So yeah.
Damn, I love his writing, and like I love his thinking. So I hope you can find a way to make it work. He's doing well now. So good. Yeah, I mean, I think that was the time, right? And then it's like, you know, people moved away, which makes sense. I mean, I thought about moving several times, and at one point, like Brian Peterson had offered me a job in Chicago as like part of him doing shows. And I had thought about it actually, but I don't know. Like I just wanted to stay in Kalamazoo, and whatever. And it was like, well, Chicago's a 2.5 hour drive, no problem. So I kept doing that. Obviously it's like I go to Chicago whenever I wanted, Detroit. Yeah. So.
Well, and that's one of the beauties of living there is you're, the halfway point between two major U.S. cities. So.
Yep, it was wonderful. And then I think that obviously Quixote had broken up, and just kind of like all those things. And I think it was like the catalyst though was just people moving, because I mean the people that were like had the motivation and the energy and the spirit, like a lot of folks moved, and so that takes some out of that scene that we had built up, and yeah.
I've actually played there a few times in the past. Well, not the past, 6 or 7 years ago, and they're in Kalamazoo, and they were like, the kids were saying, yeah, like we actually coordinate. We have house shows, and if somebody's having a house show at the end, we make sure the other one doesn't start until that one's done, and like.
Oh, really?
Still going, yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. That's right to know, because like I've lived in Portland for 10 years, and so my dad moved out here a couple of years ago. Like he's old and retired and stuff, and then my mom's still there, but I would just go home to visit them probably once a year, and just I needed to spend time with them, right? So it was like wasn't even looking into I haven't been to a show in Kalamazoo since, before I moved. So, but I'm super stoked that like there are folks still doing that. I mean, there are in every town, which is good. And I'm glad that it is still happening there though. I know they had that place called the Strut, and they had like, some other places that folks were playing at, which is good.
Wasn't the Strut where Boogie was?
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yep. So, I mean, it's like there are people doing stuff, which I think is good, and I'm glad that's still going. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I mean, I'm always going to like support and like go to shows. Like I go to shows out here in Portland, but I don't ever want to do a show again. I don't ever want to put on a show. I don't know. I mean, it's hard work, and I just have no desire for that part at all. I don't want to put out a record. I don't want to, so.
Yeah, at the most, I don't even want to like do any sort of touring, like playing maybe a weekend here or there is fine. But.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm totally with you, and but I'm happy to support. Like I still try to keep up on some things, and like obviously, if I can buy stuff from bands, I just order directly from them, or, I go to shows here in Portland, but I work so much that it's, it gets a little tricky. So.
Yeah. Well, and I've gotten to the point actually at this point in my life where like, if it's not a band, if it's a band I don't care about seeing, I'm probably not going to show up.
Yep. I totally agree with you. 'Cause it's like, I feel lucky, right? Like the three of us have seen so many bands. So I'm very lucky in that aspect. And also like part of it for my whole life was like, I got lucky to see just about every band I wanted to see. And sometimes it was because I fucking busted my ass to bring them, to my town.
Yeah.
And, well, not to mention, I mean, shit, like didn't Nirvana, like the first time they came around, didn't they stay at your place?
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
I think you remember when like, certain times where we'd all be hanging out, and like during that scene, it's like folks would make fun of me, about like, oh, you're gonna tell that story, and like I would never tell. I tried to never tell the story, just because like it's fine. They say it at my house, but I also was like, whatever. But some folks would just kind of make fun of me either because it happened, or like,
But it's so surreal to think about.
Yeah, it still is.
It's a surreal story to think about.
Well, and the thing about sorry, go ahead, Ian.
I was just gonna say, like, there's that Green Day story where they played at that barn, or
which they didn't,
but they played, the year before that. I did that show with them at the pizza place, so yeah. But like, the Nirvana story was it was one of those things where, Actually, and just basically like super quick, right? Like they were playing on a Monday night with Steel Pole Bathtub. It's at WIDR, New Music Mondays. Liz Barney calls me and is like, "Hey, could you interview Nirvana on Wider? Like we need to pump the show, and like we don't have anybody to do it." And I was like, okay. So I drove down, and my dad was out of town. I was living with him in this apartment, and I drove all of them. And the roadie at the time was the bass player from Soundgarden. So we drove up to Wider. I interviewed him on the air to pump up the show. Then, the show itself, there was like, 20 people there. Like, honestly, there was 20 people. And Steel Pole Bathtub didn't want to play last. So they played second, and they were really the headliner. And then literally people left, and then there was like, 12 people, and Nirvana played. And both them and Steel Pole Bathtub needed a place to stay. So they stayed over. There was so little people that came to the show that I had to drive Nirvana up to Wider the next day so Wider could pay them their guarantee because they didn't have it in cash that night at the bar.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, okay. Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, no, you heard it here first. Like that is the story. And what's really funny about all of this, that Ian, you mentioned that, is that I work for a company called Coinbase, which is a cryptocurrency company, and I've been there for about 2.5 years, and like I'm a manager for like teams kind of across. We have like a global team. Anyway, the long story short is I had someone new start he's probably 25 years old. He just moved from Oregon to Utah because we're a fully remote company. So anyways, the other day I was having a one-on-one with him, and he's like, "Hey, I'm supposed to ask you about the time Kurt Cobain stayed at your house." And I'm like, "How the fuck did you hear that?" I'm like, I don't tell anybody in the last 2 jobs I've had in the last years in Portland. Like, I mean, nobody knows that. Like, I don't ever bring it up. And like somebody at Coinbase, when I first started, I mean, I remember somebody knew something, and asked me about it, but I have no idea how he found out. I mean, obviously somebody I work with closely told him. So, yeah, I had to tell this 25-year-old kid this story, and I felt really old. But I don't know. It's weird.
Are you finding, like, working in that field, is it a lot of, like, do you find that there's a lot of, like, people who were at one point involved in punk that you're working with, or? Yeah.
In tech, I mean, so here's the funny thing, right? Mm-hmm. I moved out to Portland and was working at Lowe's, home improvement warehouse forever. And horrible company. And I was like, all right, I got to get out. And I found a job at this online bank out of Portland. It was called Simple, and it was a tech company. It was like my first foray into tech, right? And I mean, I met some truly wonderful people. I mean, like super progressive, like creative, right? And so that just really propelled things. And then with the involvement I had with like Music Fest, Northwest, and Pickathon, it was like, man, just meeting so many great people. And yes, I mean, I absolutely, like, I came across like some dude I worked with at Simple was in, shit, now I forget the name of the band, but they played Goleta Fest, and he was like a drummer in the band. And he, like, one day I'm just like at Simple working, and he hits me up and he's like, "Are you the guy that was in Jihad?" And I'm like, "Maybe." I'm like, where's this going? And he's like, "Oh, fuck, dude." And he starts going to, like, we knew all these same people and, like, all these things. And so, yeah, I've definitely found that, like, there's a ton of folks that work in tech now that, we were all doing things in the DIY scene way back then.
I used to work at a nonprofit for animal rights several years ago, and almost everyone I worked with had some story of like, "Oh yeah, I was in this band, or I used to go to these shows," that kind of thing. It's so fucking weird, but
it is weird because you come across some folks, and it's like, it's a great way to connect. So I feel lucky about that I've connected with folks that maybe I wouldn't have, and they always have good stories of the things they were doing. So it's weird. I mean, this is just a quick tangent, but the world of Coinbase is crypto is interesting. Like, I think there are underlying aspects to it that make sense, but I think probably you two know that unfortunately it is still a world inhabited by libertarian assholes. And whatever, like, my employer's not going to hear this podcast, but I'm going to leave Coinbase probably at some point in the next year, because I've met so many great progressive people within tech, but like the problem is the folks that run the companies and upper management, man, dude, it's everything you hear about it, where it's just like the grind and the whole thing. It's true. And, it is not cool.
Are you doing like, are you coding, or are you doing like project?
No, I'm a manager in like the operations department.
Okay.
So I have like a global team of analysts that, I mean, I work in the area right now of like, shit. I mean, one of the things we do is like, if you sign up for a Coinbase account, we have to run your name against a list of like OFAC lists and like sanction lists to like keep terrorists off platforms. It's like what we do. That kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm actually not an engineer. My partner, she is actually an engineer and has been doing that for about 10 years. And she actually recently got a job in the New York Times in their games department. And like,
oh, wow.
You want to talk about a progressive organization within an organization, like, the crossword puzzle and like the spelling bee and all that stuff. I'm just so happy and like amazed at like how awesome all those folks are and like progressive they are. And it's just like, yeah, it's like, okay, there are some good people and good companies out in tech,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to come across that. And like I said, that there are some folks I work with at Coinbase that are some of the most greatest humans ever. So, we'll figure out a way to find some other places to work at. And like, I do want to get out of tech and then just put my energy into my community and like some nonprofit that is doing some work. So that's, and I mean, I wouldn't be thinking that way if it wasn't for all this stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I still want to do that. So just maybe not like, I don't want to start a band, but I want to, I mean, I always go back to the first time I pulled Crass's Stations of the Crass album out, and that there's that whole pamphlet in there that set me on my way to this day.
Hell yeah.
Thank you for listening. Seriously, I can't say thank you enough for giving me the opportunity, because it just feels really good to connect with you all. And honestly, in all the folks I mentioned, it's like, yeah, I miss all those folks. And thanks for giving me the opportunity. And I absolutely look forward to to hearing it, and then just continuing to hear as I try to catch up on. I want to catch up on your podcast in a few things. So. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Definitely.
Yeah, dude.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah,
It's really good.
It was great catching up.